Okay, class, today what we're going to talk about is value. Essentially how to shade, how to do the hatching and cross hatching. So let's get started. Um, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through one of these. And remember, we went through this in class. What I'm going to do is just for the people that didn't understand it or was the first time they were seeing it, I'm going to explain to you how this works. So, whenever you go, let's say you go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby and you buy a set of pencils, you have 12 pencils. You have different gradations of them, meaning the light is on the left side. It goes from light to dark. Now, let's talk about what hatching and cross hatching is. Hatching is when you make the lines parallel to each other. So it's the closer they are, the darker it gets, the further apart, the lighter it becomes. It's quite simple. And if hatching, say if you're making lines diagonally like this would be hatching. They're all parallel. And if it goes this way, then that's cross hatching. So for an example, is like these are all hatching. You get to here, it's hatching and then cross hatching, hatching, cross hatching. Now, since these are diagonal, let's say you start adding vertical lines and then horizontal line, it's still cross hatching. There's no other word for it. It's just hatching or cross hatching. Okay, so then let's move on to here. It says the closer the lines, the darker it is, which I just talked about. Now I do wanted to show you this. I wanted to show you, see, here's the further apart, the lighter it is. The light comes from this end. This is darker. Then we deal with, once again, the light is coming from this end. This is darker. Now I want you guys to remember we talked about this. You don't have to stay within the lines. You can go outside the lines. Why? Because you have an eraser. And once you with the eraser, all you have to do is you come back and then just swipe it clean like that. Because if not, if you try to stay within the lines, you end up having something like this. And this doesn't look right. But as opposed to this, look how it goes. And now I left this here just so you can see how I went outside the lines. Now, in all this, the one thing I wanted to show you is this has the set of pencils has 12 pencils. And what they do is, I wanted to show you is how I work. You always go from light to dark. Always, it's much easier to go from light to dark because it's easier to, let's say you mess up, it's easier to erase. So for example, I always start off with these H's. HB is your regular number 2 pencil. And then you go into the 2s, the 4s. In other words, you don't have to use each one the way it is. You can skip around. On average, I use, like in a set of 12, I probably use half of them, maybe a little bit more, depends. But here's what happens. Here's the H. I use the H's for this kind of shadows, and then the B's for these kind of shadows. So the darker the shadow, the higher B pencil I will use. Now, when we deal with cross hatching and we do this with spheres, spheres are really, in other words, you're dealing with curvature lines. Because remember, whenever whenever you add value to anything, you have to go with the contours of the object. In this case, for example, it's a flat box, pyramid, flat, but then you have a sphere. How are we going to do that? Well, you have to do it with the contours of it. So in other words, you've got to have curvature lines. And if you see how I went here, I went from this end and then I started going this other way. And so what you keep going, and then eventually you end up having something like this. Now, by doing this is another thing that you guys have to understand. Remember, wherever the light comes from, the outline of the object, the line is much lighter than where the shadow is at. So look at this, or better yet, look at this, and then look at the lines here, and then look at the shadow lines, the outside. It's much darker. These lines are much darker than these. Why? Because the light is coming from this end. In this case, the light is coming from this end. Then you have the much darker line here. And then you have the reflective light. Why? Because it's on whatever reflects the table or whatever it's on, it reflects it. And then you have the light. Now, some of the stuff, as I said, it's quite simple. It just needs practice to make. The other thing I will say is about something like this. Remember when I said it goes when you do value, when you add value, or when you shade, you have to shade with the contours of whatever object it is. In this case, it's the body, and the body does not have a straight line. They're all curves. We're 3D, so everything has to be curved, everything. So if you look at the muscles, look at these lines. Now this I will post as, you guys can look it up. The PowerPoint presentation, the PowerPoints itself, I'll post them on Blackboard and you guys can look into it. And that should be it, guys. This is the value presentation.